My name is Jenna Monroe. I'm Evelyn Monroe's only daughter. But if you had walked into her funeral that day, you wouldn't have known I existed. I stood in the very last row of the church, tucked behind a marble column like a forgotten afterthought. No one turned to acknowledge me. Not my stepfather. Not my half-sister. Not even the priest when he listed the names of those closest to my mother. I wasn't mentioned. I wasn't expected. And clearly, I wasn't welcome. It was my mother's funeral, but it felt like a stranger's ceremony, scripted, sanitized, and rewritten without me in it. 3 weeks ago, I had begged to see her in the hospital. My calls were blocked. My texts went unanswered. She's too tired. They told mutual acquaintances. She needs peace, not chaos. Apparently, I was chaos. A daughter from the first marriage. The one they quietly erased. The chapel smelled of lilies and lies. My stepfather stood tall at the pulpit, voice thick with performance. She was a wonderful wife and mother, he declared, and I nearly laughed. Because I knew how she had cried herself to sleep most nights. I knew how she missed the daughter they locked out. When the priest stepped forward to close the service, an unfamiliar man in a tailored gray suit rose from the front row. His presence silenced the murmurs. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, holding up a small black device. But before she passed Ms. Evelyn Monroe requested this be played at the end of her funeral. The room went still. My mother had left a recording, and in that moment, everything I thought I knew about her death, about my place in her life, began to unravel. I didn't cry when the recording started. I couldn't. Because long before this day, I had already grieved the loss of my mother. Not just the moment she died, but the slow, quiet way I was cut out of her life piece by piece. The first time I realized I was being erased, it wasn't loud. It didn't come in a screaming match or a slammed door. It came in whispers. Gaps. Silences that stretched longer than they used to. It started with something small. My name disappeared from her emergency contact form at the clinic. I only found out when a nurse called my stepfather, instead of me, about her medication change. "You're not listed," she said apologetically, as if I was the one who made a mistake. Then came the missed birthday. Not forgotten in a distracted, busy kind of way. Just completely absent. No call, no text, no mention. I remember staring at my phone that night, half expecting a, "Sorry, sweetie! Got caught up." That never came. But the worst came later, when she got sick, and I wasn't told. I found out through a Facebook post. A second cousin wrote something vague about sending prayers to Evelyn. I messaged her. "What happened?" She replied, "Oh, you didn't know?" Then she ghosted me. I called the house immediately. Dean, my stepfather, answered. "She's resting, Jenna. You don't need to come by," he said flatly. "She doesn't want visitors right now?" "She doesn't want me?" I asked. "She needs peace, not more stress." I clutched the phone so hard I left fingernail marks in my palm. "I'm her daughter." There was a pause. "And I'm her husband. This is what she wants." Then the line went dead. For days, I convinced myself he was lying. That Mom would call me herself when she was stronger. That she'd text. That she'd say, "Ignore Dean, I've missed you like hell." But that message never came. Instead, silence became routine. I started sending things. Flowers, letters, and books I knew she loved. I wrote pages and pages. She never answered. I tried reaching her through Taylor, my stepsister, but Taylor blocked me. No explanation, just vanished. She and I had never been close. When Mom married Dean, Taylor was 15 and mean. She used to roll her eyes and call me the leftover when Mom wasn't around. Her own mom had died when she was 10, and somewhere along the way, she decided my existence was a threat. Over the years, Taylor grew more calculating. She moved back in with Mom and Dean after college. "Just temporarily," she said. But she never left. And somewhere in that house, she started rewriting our mother's world, cutting out what didn't serve her, cutting out me. The last time I spoke to my mother directly was 7 months before she passed. I remember the call. She sounded tired. Off. Like someone else was in the room. You okay? I asked. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired, she said. Taylor made soup today. I waited. She didn't ask me how work was going. Didn't ask if I was still seeing Nate. She sounded distracted, distant. Can I come visit this weekend? I asked. There was a long pause. Let me check with Dean. That was when I knew. She wasn't allowed to say yes anymore. The following months blurred together. I stopped asking. But I kept hoping. I kept dialing her number even when I knew no one would pick up. Then one morning, the obituary appeared. My phone lit up with a message from my Aunt Lorraine. I'm so sorry for your loss. I just saw the paper. I didn't understand at first. I clicked the link she sent. There it was, Evelyn Monroe, beloved wife and mother of Taylor Ray Monroe, passed peacefully. My name wasn't there, not even a mention of a previous marriage. Not even a line that read, survived by her daughters. Just one daughter. And it wasn't me. I stared at the screen, cold spreading through my chest like frostbite. That omission said everything. Not just that I didn't matter, but that I had been erased. Fully, cleanly, I printed the obituary out, folded it once, twice, slipped it into my journal like a death certificate for my place in her life. I didn't scream. I didn't call. I didn't beg. I went quiet too. For days, I didn't eat, didn't answer texts. Friends reached out. Are you okay? I'm here if you need to talk. But how do you explain a loss you weren't even allowed to witness? I debated not attending the funeral. What was the point? I clearly wasn't wanted. I hadn't even received the service details directly, only a forwarded message from that same aunt. Dean and Taylor had made sure I'd stay in the dark. And honestly, part of me wanted to respect their wish, to pretend I never existed. But then, something else kicked in. Not revenge. Not pride. Just a quiet, stubborn ache in my chest that whispered, you deserve to say goodbye. So I showed up, late. Alone. No makeup. No speech prepared. Just me and a storm inside my chest. They didn't see me. Or if they did, they didn't acknowledge it. Taylor sat in the front row, tearless and composed. Dean held her hand, the picture of devoted fatherhood. It made me sick. And then, the lawyer came. The man in the gray suit with the calm voice, and the small black device. When he stood up and said Mom had left a recording to be played, my heart stopped. I hadn't heard her voice in months. And now, in this cold room where I was invisible, she was about to speak. At first, I wasn't sure it was her. The audio crackled faintly as the room held its breath. Then, a pause, a soft exhale, and then came the voice I thought I'd never hear again. Hi, Jenna. 3 syllables, gentle, intentional, not sweetheart, not my love, just my name, spoken clearly, like an anchor thrown into stormy waters. If you're hearing this, it means I've gone. And it also means they did what I feared they would. I gripped the edge of the pew. The whole church seemed to tilt slightly, like the ground under me wasn't quite solid anymore. They told you I didn't want to see you. That I was resting. That I was confused. They lied. Murmurs rippled through the chapel like wind through brittle leaves. I didn't look up. I couldn't. I was never confused. Her voice continued. I was scared. Scared of how isolated I'd become. Scared of what would happen to you if I said too much while they were listening. They. I knew exactly who she meant. Dean's face turned to stone. Taylor shifted in her seat, arms crossed, jaw tight. I wanted to see you, Jenna. Every day. I waited for your letters. I hid them. I read them again and again, when they thought I was sleeping. I wrote back more times than I can count, but none of those replies ever made it out of the house. Something inside me cracked. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't made it worse in my mind. She had reached for me, and they'd silenced her. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder, she whispered. But I saved something. I saved the truth. And I gave it to someone who promised he'd make sure you got it. Mr. Graves, the lawyer, sat quietly near the front. I could see now, He wasn't just some legal assistant. He was the guardian of her final voice. I want you to go to the Riverbank storage unit. Unit 108. The key is taped to the back of the frame in my sewing box. The one with the blue floral lid. You'll find the rest there. The recording paused for a breath. And Jenna? Whatever they say next, whatever they threaten, don't let them shame you. You were the best part of me. And if I had to choose again, I'd choose you. Then silence. No music, no goodbye, just silence. A stillness so sharp it cut through bone. The priest cleared his throat, but no one moved. No one dared speak first. Dean stood up slowly, his voice brittle. That recording is taken out of context. She was on medication. She didn't understand what was happening. Mr. Graves rose before anyone else could. That's not true, he said firmly. Ems Monroe recorded that message 10 days before her passing, during a verified period of lucidity, and she requested, explicitly, that it be played in public. Taylor stood now, eyes burning. This is disgusting. A stunt. A ploy? A ploy for what? I said, finally finding my voice. She didn't leave me anything. But I stopped myself. Because I didn't know that. Not yet. Taylor's glare narrowed. She was manipulated. Dean stepped in. We'll be speaking with our attorney. But Mr. Graves only nodded. Of course. And I'll see you there. He turned to me then, only me. Jenna. I'll need to speak with you privately. After the service. I nodded. That was all I could manage. The rest of the funeral passed in a haze. I didn't hear the eulogy. I didn't see who else came. I just sat frozen in the back row, her voice echoing in my ears, looping over and over. You were the best part of me. Go to Unit 108. Afterward, while mourners filed out murmuring polite confusion, I met Mr. Greaves in the vestibule. He handed me a manila envelope. Inside a copy of the revised will, and a post-it note in neat handwriting. If she's reading this, don't let them talk you out of it. Love, Mom. I'll handle the probate process, Mr. Greaves said calmly. But Evelyn's last wishes were very clear. You're her primary heir. Everything has already been notarized and documented. The original will has been revoked. I stared at him. Everything. He nodded. The house, her personal accounts, her pension fund, her insurance, and, yes, the storage unit. I swallowed. Did she explain why she changed it? He paused. She didn't need to. But off the record, I think she saw what was happening. And she didn't want her silence to be the final word. I clutched the envelope like it was a lifeline, and for the first time since she died, I felt her again, not as a distant memory, not as someone fading away, but as someone still fighting. Still present, still mine. That night, I drove to my old apartment, still numb. I didn't return to the funeral reception. I couldn't stand another moment watching Dean fake grief, or Taylor play the grieving daughter for sympathy. Instead, I sat on the floor of my living room with the sewing box in my lap. The same one I remembered from my childhood, the lid fraying at the edges, the little pink cushion still smelling faintly of lavender. I opened it slowly. Inside, under a tangle of old buttons and embroidery thread, I found the frame. An old photo of me and Mom at the beach when I was 7. My cheeks were sunburned. She was laughing, holding my hand. On the back of the frame, taped carefully, was the key. I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat there holding it, letting the weight of it settle into my palm. She had saved this for me. Not money, not revenge, a truth. And tomorrow, I would open it. The storage facility sat at the edge of town, flanked by a chain link fence and rows of rust-colored doors that buzzed with fluorescent light. I pulled into the lot just before 10 a.m., the key from the sewing box clutched in my damp palm. Unit 108. I walked past dozens of identical roll-up doors until I found it, paint chipped, number faded, like it had been waiting for years. I hesitated, not because I was scared, but because this wasn't just a unit. This was a version of my mother no one else was meant to see. With a slow breath, I slid the key into the lock. It turned easily. The door groaned as it rolled up, revealing the contents inside a tidy arrangement of labeled boxes, 2 suitcases, a covered easel, and a cedar chest. Everything was perfectly arranged. Deliberate, almost gentle, I stepped inside. The air smelled like old paper and dried roses. Dust hung like a thin veil over everything, undisturbed but not forgotten. I knelt by the first box, labeled in her handwriting, Jnes Lectars, Unopened Copy S. My heart stopped. Inside were dozens of my own letters. The ones I thought had vanished into nothing. Each one had been photocopied, dated, logged, and beneath them, a slim notebook titled, What I Couldn't Say Out Loud. I opened it carefully. Her handwriting, precise, slanted, stared up at me. March 3rd. Jenna called again. I wasn't allowed to answer. Dean said I needed rest. I nodded, smiled, and cried when he left the room. March 10th. Taylor shredded the card Jenna sent for my birthday. I only saw the envelope. I asked her where it went. She told me I must be misremembering. March 17th. The lawyer came today. I signed the new will. My hands shook, not out of fear, but relief. I shut the notebook and placed it gently beside me, like it was sacred. This was her truth. And now it was mine. The next box was heavier. Inside, photo albums. Not the ones I remembered from the living room at home, but our albums. Me and Mom. Me in Halloween costumes. Me in school plays. Cards I made in 2nd grade. A lock of hair from my first haircut. A hospital bracelet from when I broke my arm, and she stayed up with me all night. None of it had been on display in her house these past 10 years, but she'd kept it. She'd kept it all. I sat back on my heels, blinking fast. The world had tried so hard to convince me I'd been forgotten. Replaced. Written out. But this place said otherwise. She hadn't erased me. She'd hidden me. To protect what they couldn't touch. In the far corner sat the cedar chest. I opened it slowly. Inside were a few of her favorite sweaters, a stack of journals, and an envelope marked, in case they try to silence her again. I opened it carefully. Inside printed emails, medical records, screenshots, copies of text messages, receipts for cash withdrawals Taylor had made from Mom's account, a letter Mom had written to her doctor, expressing concern that her access to communication was being controlled by family. Attached was the doctor's reply, stating she had referred the case to hospital social services. But nothing ever came of it. The evidence was overwhelming. It painted a picture not of a confused old woman, but of someone trying desperately to be heard through walls of manipulation. My mother hadn't lost her voice. It had been buried, and now she was handing it to me. I sat there for over 2 hours, reading, sorting, and absorbing. Sometimes I laughed. A birthday card I made in kindergarten said, "I love you even when you sing loud in the car." Sometimes I cried. A journal entry from just 6 weeks before she died read, "Jenna would have made a beautiful mother. I hope she knows I still believe in her. I hope she knows I see her." I hadn't felt seen in years. But here she was, watching, remembering, writing it all down for the day I might find it. The last item in the unit was the easel, covered in white cloth. I peeled it back slowly. It was a painting, not a masterpiece. Not technically impressive, but deeply personal. Mom and I are sitting on a porch swing. Her hand is in mine. The sky behind us filled with reds and violets. She'd painted it from memory. I knew the dress I wore, the locket around her neck, and the crooked way I sat. In the bottom corner, she'd signed her name. And beneath it, 4 words. She was never forgotten. I pressed my hand to the canvas and let myself cry. Not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd just reclaimed. I didn't bring everything home that day. Just 3 things: the notebook, the painting, and the envelope of evidence. Because I knew what I had to do next. It wasn't just about grief anymore. It was about truth. And I wasn't going to let them bury it again. I didn't call ahead. I wanted them unprepared. I parked in front of the house I used to call home. Its shutters freshly painted, the lawn carefully manicured. Everything on the outside looked perfect. As always, but I knew now perfection was their favorite disguise. I rang the doorbell, once. Dean answered. his expression flickering for half a second before settling into something polite and wary. "Jenna?" he said slowly. "This is a surprise. Is it?" I replied, stepping past him into the hallway. "I thought the funeral recording might have tipped you off." He closed the door behind me. "Taylor's not home." "I'm not here for Taylor," I said, pulling the envelope from my bag. "I'm here for the truth." Dean's jaw tensed. "If this is about the will, I've already contacted an attorney." "Good," I said calmly. "Then you'll know what this is." I placed the envelope on the kitchen table, spreading its contents like playing cards. Receipts, screenshots, handwritten letters, a copy of Mom's complaint to her doctor, the dated confirmation of the revised will, a photo of the easel. And finally, the notebook. He stared at the items without touching them, like they might burn him. "You went through her things. She left them for me." My voice didn't rise. I didn't need it to. Dean let out a slow, dismissive breath. Evelyn wasn't in her right mind. I slid a document across the table. "That's her psychiatric evaluation from the week she changed the will. Seen by 2 doctors. Certified, notarized." His hand twitched, but he didn't pick it up. "She was clearer than she'd been in years," I added. "Because she'd finally stopped being afraid of you." His mask cracked then, just briefly. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the front door opened. Taylor stepped in, sunglasses perched on her head, coffee in hand, mid-text. She froze when she saw me. "Oh," she said coolly. "You're back?" I smiled without warmth. "I never really left. You just tried to erase me," she scoffed. "You're seriously still clinging to this poor, me narrative." Mom was confused. She didn't know what she wanted. I held up the notebook. She knew exactly what she wanted. She just wasn't allowed to say it out loud. That's why she wrote it here. In her own handwriting. With dates. With names. And with everything she remembered. Taylor rolled her eyes. "Even if she did change the will, it doesn't mean you deserve anything. You were barely in her life." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Because you made sure of it. Because you deleted my messages. Because you lied to her face. Because you told a dying woman that her daughter didn't love her." Taylor flinched. "She knew," I whispered. "She figured it out. And she chose me. Not because I was perfect. But because I stayed loyal, even when you tried to turn her against me." Dean slammed his palm on the table. "Get out." I turned to him. "This house. You might want to check the title again. It's part of the estate, and as of last week, the court officially recognized the revised will. It's mine now." Silence. Taylor's coffee cup hit the floor with a dull thud, splashing across the tile. "You're bluffing," she said, her voice shaking. I pulled out a folded paper. "No. I'm executing." I didn't stay long after that. I wasn't there to rub salt in wounds. I was there to deliver a message. You don't get to bury people and still own their name. When I walked out the front door, I didn't look back. But I heard Taylor screaming. Heard something shatter. Dean's voice rising, trying to contain the chaos. It was poetic, really. All that control unraveling in the same kitchen, where they used to plan which lies to tell. The next day, my attorney filed for a full audit of the estate. The assets, the withdrawals, the unexplained expenses, on Mom's account. It wasn't about revenge. It was about documentation. Truth. Closure. I didn't post about it. I didn't tell anyone except a few close friends. But word got out. And it spread fast. Taylor stopped showing up at her boutique job. Dean's face disappeared from the HOA committee website. Their curated life was cracking. And I didn't have to lift a finger. Mom had already done it. She'd left a truth so undeniable, all I had to do was open the box. That weekend, I returned to the storage unit to bring the rest home. The painting now hangs above my bed. The journals are lined on my bookshelf, each labeled, each read and reread. And the sewing box, it sits on my desk, still full of buttons and thread, and the scent of her perfume. Because it reminds me the smallest things are sometimes the strongest proof. Proof that love existed, even when others tried to rewrite it. The first voicemail came 3 nights later. It was 2:14 a.m. I watched the phone screen light up on my nightstand in the dark. Taylor's name. Then her voice, slurred, raw. You think this is over? You think you won? A hiccup. A shaky breath. She didn't even talk about you the last year. You don't get to pretend she loved you more. You don't get to act like you were the victim. I didn't respond. The next morning, she left another message. This time, she was crying. I lost everything. The shop. My apartment. Her voice cracked. Dad says he can't help anymore. He's selling the boat. Do you know what you did to us? I didn't answer that one either. Because I didn't do this to them. They did it to themselves. All I did was not stay silent anymore. The following week, a letter arrived from Dean's lawyer, a last-ditch attempt to dispute the ownership transfer of the house, citing emotional manipulation and undue influence. My lawyer smiled when he read it. This won't go anywhere. And it didn't. The court dismissed the claim in less than 2 weeks. Dean had underestimated how meticulous Mom had been. She'd left everything. Even a notarized statement outlining her reasons for cutting them out. They isolated me. They used me. And when I stopped being useful, they controlled me with guilt and silence. I chose Jenna because she saw me. Even when I was no longer seen by the people under my roof. Singed Evelyn Monroe. Dated 2 months before she died. There was nothing left for them to argue about. So they stopped. The silence that followed was almost eerie. No more threats. No more voicemails. Just absence. But it didn't scare me. It felt earned. It felt peaceful. I spent that silence building something better. The items from the storage unit weren't just relics. They were tools. Pieces of a story worth sharing. Not out of spite, but out of purpose. I took the journals, letters, painting, and even the notebook, and began piecing together a manuscript. Not a memoir of trauma. A testament to survival. To the quiet ways women are erased, and the even quieter ways they fight back. I titled it The Letter That Saved Me, because that's what it was. Not a fortune. Not a revenge plot. A voice. One final voice that pulled me back into myself. A month later, I held a soft launch at the local library. I didn't invite anyone from the old life. No extended family. No old neighbors. Just people who had seen me before and stayed. As I read the final passage aloud, a familiar quote made its way back into my throat. If they ever beg, let them. If they kneel, watch them. But never speak. Silence is the answer they earned. From my mother's final letter. The room went still. Some nodded. Some teared up. All understood. One morning, I returned home from the grocery store to find a small package at my door. No note. No return address. Inside was a thin envelope and a silver bracelet. Tarnished. Worn. I recognized it instantly. It was my mother's. The one she used to wear every Christmas. The one Taylor always said was tacky. And inside the envelope, a photograph. Me and Mom, arm in arm on the front porch of our first house. A sticky note was taped to the back. In handwriting that wasn't Mom's day. I found this while packing. She looked happiest with you. No signature. I stared at it for a long time. Then I walked to the backyard and placed the photo under the oak tree I'd planted in Mom's memory. No frame. No plaque. Just roots. I never replied. Not to the voicemails. Not to the package. Not to the people who whispered behind my back. Because the point was never to win their approval. It was to reclaim what they tried to erase. My name, my mother, my voice. Now I spend my mornings in the sunroom with tea and a journal. The same room Mom used to paint in. I've kept it almost exactly the same. Her brushes are in the mason jar. Her half-used tubes of acrylics lined up on the shelf. A single lavender candle burned low each night before I slept. People sometimes ask why I never fought harder to be back in her life sooner. And the truth is, I did. They just made sure no one heard me. So now, I make sure no one forgets her. Or me. One year after the funeral, I hosted a community event at the house, not a memorial, for daughters, sons, siblings, anyone who'd ever been pushed aside, but still chose to remember the people they loved with clarity and conviction. The walls were lined with photos. Real ones. Of Mom painting. Of her laughing. She was curled up in a chair, reading one of my letters. I didn't need to prove to anyone that she loved me. She already had, with a storage unit, a key, and a voice they never thought I'd hear. It started with an email. Subject line, "Your story moved me." I nearly deleted it, thinking it was spam. But something made me click. It was from a woman named Leila Torres, editor at a mid-size publishing house in Portland. She'd picked up my self-published book at an airport kiosk while waiting for a delayed flight. She read it cover to cover before her plane even boarded. Her message was short. Genuine. "I've never seen silence written so powerfully. We'd love to help amplify this story. If you're open to it, I'd like to talk." We did. And 6 months later, the letter that saved me was republished in hardcover. This time with a foreword written by a grief counselor, who said she now required her clients to read Chapter 4. It was surreal. The book made its way into therapist offices, support groups, college syllabi, not because it was literary genius, but because it told the truth plainly. And that, I've learned, is rarer than it should be. I was invited to speak at a regional conference on grief and family estrangement. I almost said no. But then I remembered how many nights I'd sat in the dark with Mom's notebook in my lap, wondering if I'd ever feel visible again. So I stood before a room full of strangers, social workers, hospice nurses, adult children with wary eyes, and told them what I wish someone had told me years ago. Silence isn't always consent. Sometimes, it's the only weapon someone has left. I didn't mention Dean, or Taylor, or court dates, or voicemails, or the mess left behind. Because by then, it no longer defined me. What did? The people who came up to me afterward. The man who whispered, "Your mother reminds me of mine." The girl asked, "Do you think forgiveness is ever necessary?" And the woman, mid-60s, sharp eyes, trembling voice, who simply said, "Thank you for proving we're not crazy." At home, life was quieter, but full. I turned Mom's old art room into a reading space for local teens. Every Friday, we held story circles, no phones, no judgment, just human voices filling the air with fragments of what they'd seen and carried. One day, a girl named Maisie stayed behind after the group. "I read your book," she said softly. "My dad left when I was 5. No one ever lets me talk about it. But your story, it made me feel like I'm allowed to miss him, even if he hurt me." I smiled and handed her one of Mom's old sketchbooks. "Then draw him. Or write him. Or talk to the stars. But don't let silence eat your memory." She hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe. It felt like Mom was hugging me through her. Dean and Taylor never reached out again. Last I heard, he'd retired to Florida, remarried, and joined a church that believed in rebuilding. Taylor moved west, worked odd jobs, started a YouTube channel about healing through yoga. She never mentioned Mom. Or me. People sometimes ask if I've forgiven them. I always say the same thing. Forgiveness is between them, and whatever mirror they can stand to look into. I'm not angry anymore. Not because I forgot, but because I've built something too beautiful to let anger rot it. Every year on the anniversary of Mom's passing, I return to the oak tree behind the house. I don't bring flowers. I bring a chair, and a journal, and sometimes, a thermos of tea, and I talk about the kids who come to the center. About the mural we added to the library wing with her initials tucked in the corner. About the college freshman who emailed me last week saying, "I read your book on the plane home for the holidays." I hugged my mom for the first time in 3 years. I think she hears me. No, I know she does. The wind always picks up around that time. The leaves shift. And for a moment, it's like we're both sitting there. Not as mother and daughter, but as 2 women who made it through. The final entry in her last journal sits framed on my mantel. It reads, If I am remembered only by the daughter they tried to take from me, I will count that as a full life. That is legacy. Not the money. Not the house. Not the name on a marble stone. But the courage to be seen, and to leave a path for someone else to follow. I light a candle before bed each night. The same lavender scent she loved. It's not ritual. It's presence. Because even in her absence, Mom remains the loudest silence I've ever known. And the most powerful voice I'll ever carry.